Hello, and welcome to this week's edition of Lab Rats. So last week I had you do an experiment where you mixed dish detergent, hydrogen peroxide, and yeast, which we know are actually a fungus, a living organism called a fungus. And we added all those three things together and it produced this pretty stellar reaction, actually. I was a bit surprised at how incredibly well that reaction took place. So that was a catalyzing reaction. That's when you add something to a reaction that either that usually speeds it up or alters it in some way, but the catalyzing agent itself isn't affected at all. It comes out of the reaction the same. So in this instance, the yeast was the catalyzing reaction. We added the yeast, it sped up the reaction, but the yeast themselves were still alive and happy. And if you actually left your plate of foamy water, you would have had a bunch of yeast that would have been left on the bottom of that plate or tray, whatever it was that you did that experiment on, which is basically proof that the yeast weren't affected by the reaction. The material that you had left over, the liquidy substance, is actually water. So hydrogen peroxide is H2O2. What happened is the yeast helped kick off one of the oxygens, and so you're left with water and oxygen that escaped into the atmosphere, which is what caused the bubbling. So this week we're doing a experiment that is based partly on chemistry and partly on biology. So I gave you 2 eggs in your kit this week. So what I wanted you to do is I wanted you to examine the outside of your egg. And if you examine the outside of an egg, I don't know if you can see it in my camera here, but it kind of has a porous outer shell, and that's because this actually does have a bunch of tiny little microscopic holes that go right through the egg that allow, there's a membrane right underneath the eggshell that allows this egg to actually, in a sense, breathe or exchange gases with the environment. And that's because this is where baby chicks come from. Not in store-bought eggs. Store-bought eggs are unable to develop into anything, but this is where baby chicks come from. So we kind of just want to have a look at what the structure of an egg looks like. So if you drop your egg into a glass jar like this, and then you pour vinegar in, you're going to get a reaction. So vinegar is an acid, and calcium carbonate, which is what the shell of that egg is made out of, so that's Ca, which is calcium, CO3, so the CO3 is carbonate. It doesn't like acid. So if you look really closely at this, you'll see that you have a whole bunch of bubbles developing on the bottom of that. That's because what's happening is the vinegar, which is an acid, is essentially reacting with the carbon, with the carbonate, and it's turning that carbonate into carbon dioxide, and it's leaving behind the calcium. So in your little card, I told you that you should take your egg out every once in a while and rinse it off, because it'll help the reaction take place faster. Also, if you have more vinegar at home, you should probably change out the vinegar every once in a while, because that'll also help this process speed up. So what this is going to do is it's going to completely dissolve this egg's shell, and it takes about 24 hours plus or minus to do that. So you can leave it there and set it aside. Eventually you'll have to kind of wash the egg off. Be very, very, very careful, because the membrane is it's very delicate, and you can rupture your egg, which I definitely did a handful of times in trying to prepare this video for you. So you had 2 eggs. I want you to dissolve the shells, and then I want you to have a look at them. So you're going to be left with something that looks like this. So if you look really carefully, if you looked through a light, you could actually see that there's a yolk, and the yolk is about right here on this guy right here. So this membrane is called a semipermeable membrane. What that means is that it can allow certain things in and out through the membrane. It can allow air, water, nutrients, things like that. And that's actually how our cells work. Our cells in our body also have a semi-permeable membrane where they allow gases and different foods that we eat and other liquids like water to move basically in and out. And this is a passive system. What that means is that there's nothing actively making that happen. This membrane allows things to pass through without there being something forcing it to go. So the next thing that I want you to do is have a look at this and say, okay, well, there's a membrane here, it's semi-permeable. You'll also see that there's a yolk and a white. The white is actually the part that would develop into the chick itself. And you'll also see that if you ever crack an egg in a pan, that there's kind of this like weird, almost cord looking thing that kind of appears. That actually is what attaches the yolk to the white to the yolk, pardon me. And the yolk is what actually would feed the developing baby chick. If you have turtle eggs, it's the same thing. Any kind of egg basically behaves the same way. And so I just wanted you to get a feel for like how eggs are, what they are, what all the parts of them are. Eggs that you find in the grocery store, once again, will not develop into baby chickens or anything. They're specifically designed to absolutely not do that. So you might be thinking, okay, why all this stuff about the semi-permeable membrane? So what you're going to do is you're going to take your 2 eggs and you're going to put one in tap water, and then you're going to put one in a super concentrated salt solution. So I gave you some salt, dissolve that. You might even need more salt. Keep dissolving salt in the cup with the egg that has the salt water in it, because it'll help this reaction again take place faster. And what you'll get is, after a couple days, I've only done this for 24 hours, so the results aren't as dramatic as it can be, but you'll basically get 2 eggs. Here, I'll put this on a plate so you can see it better. This one was in the water and this one was in the salt water, and you'll notice that this one is actually slightly smaller. This egg, when I started, was actually the larger egg, but now it's in fact smaller. If you take the camera and put it over top, right over top, you'll kind of see that one is larger than the other. So this one's larger, and that's because of how osmosis works. So what is osmosis? Osmosis is basically the movement of water through that semi-permeable membrane. When you put the egg in tap water, there are more dissolved bits and pieces of all kinds of things, salts, whatever else, proteins. There are more of those things inside the egg than there would be in the water. So the water naturally wants to travel into the egg so that it balances out the concentration of all those things on either side of the egg. It's just this random weird science thing that actually helps organisms be alive in general. The saltwater egg, there are more salt particles in the water solution than there are inside the egg. So the water wants to naturally run out of the egg into the saltwater solution to balance out the amount of salt on either side of the egg. So this is basically how it works. You have a semi-permeable membrane, and whatever side has the more salt or proteins or dissolved whatever in that water solution, the water will automatically want to rush out onto the side of the membrane that has more of those dissolved solutes, so that it can balance out the concentration on both sides of the egg. So this is actually one of the things that is responsible for why our cells are able to transport things throughout our body, why we can eat food and it gets places in our body, why plants wilt. It's also the reason why plants wilt. It's also partly responsible for how plants transport water up and down and their food up and down their xylem and phloem. They take that concentrated sugar and they pump it somewhere, and that draws the water up towards it, because the water is naturally drawn by osmosis to want to balance out the sugar content throughout its body. So really cool thing that kind of like ties a bunch of the experiments that we did together. So try it out. Leave your eggs in the salt water and tap water for maybe a few days, and you'll get way more dramatic results than this. Again, this was just 24 hours, so you can get much better results. So I hope you have fun with this, and I'll see you next week.